I spent an entire year barely leaving my house. No school, no parties, no real social interaction. Then, when the next school year arrived, I became the most sociable person in class. Not because I suddenly became more confident, but because I had practiced in my head hundreds of times. Same thing happened in business. I started an online store, was making money, it was successful, and then it all suddenly collapsed when my supplier got arrested. I started over from nothing, and what I learned was from losing it all, no matter what happens, if you actually built it in the first place, you have the capacity to build it again. And this capacity is your self-image. This video is about what it is, why imagining things can literally change your brain, and exactly how to use that. No positive thinking, no affirmations. I'm talking about what actually works scientifically. In the 1960s, there was a plastic surgeon named Maxwell Maltz. He would operate on his patients, give them exactly what they wanted, and nothing would change about their behavior. They would revert back to their original states, even though they look different. So a guy would get his nose fixed, and he would still act like his nose was the same as before. A woman would have some cosmetic procedure, and she wouldn't change her behavior. She would go back to acting like she always did. So the outside changed, but the picture they had of themselves, their perceived reality, what they thought of themselves, their self-image, did not, right? And because of this, they would still think that they were ugly. This internal picture, this perceived reality, is what Maltz called the self-image. And his assertion was simple. All he said was, you cannot consistently outperform your self-image. No discipline, no motivation, not just trying harder, none of it will work. It's like a thermostat. You'll keep getting pulled back to the temperature the thermostat is set to. That's exactly how identity or self-image works. This is also why affirmations do not work. Affirmations are basically a belief that's built on a faulty foundation, or the foundation doesn't even exist. The only way your belief or your self-image changes is through experience. This doesn't mean it's all lost. There are ways to kind of bypass it, like a cheat code. However, you can't use affirmations on their own. They will not work. Your self-image isn't going to listen just because you tell it you are a certain way. You need to prove it. There's ways to prove it. I'll get into them in a moment. However, I just want to say, don't affirm yourself into a new identity. There's better ways to do it. So the better way is through visualization, and this is where it gets interesting. Visualization sounds like it's some nonsense that doesn't work, and that's what I thought as well. However, there's actual research, like scientific research. There's studies backing it. Your brain cannot fully distinguish between an imagined experience and a real one, which means the tool that I kept talking about is visualization. You can use this to build fake experiences that serve as real experiences that can then update your self-image. In one study, two groups were taught a piano sequence. One group practiced it physically for 5 days. The other group just sat there and imagined playing it. When researchers scanned their brains afterwards, both groups had similar changes in the same regions. The imagination group had started building the skill without ever touching the instrument. There's also a basketball study. One group physically practiced throwing free throws, another in their heads. The physical group improved by 24%, and the visualization group, they improved by 23%. A 1% difference, which means it was the same. So the reason this works is when you imagine doing something, you really feel it, you really imagine it, and you go through all of the emotions, your brain activates many of the same neural pathways that would be activated otherwise in a real experience. Because of this, you can use simulated experiences to create output that's real. So fake experiences create real outcomes, which is quite impressive. Two things to keep in mind when you use this. First, make sure it's very specific. The image, the details, everything, right? Make sure the shot, like for example, if you're using the basketball study, they would have been instructed to imagine very vividly throwing the basketball and going through the motions. That's the first step. Make it very specific, make it very detailed. The second thing is emotions. Embed emotions into the visuals. When you do this, what ends up happening is your brain sees it as more important. This is good because we want it to act as real experience so that we can update the self-image. A massive mistake people make is they only picture the end result. This is actually not the ideal way to do it, and I discovered this through looking over like everybody's visualization advice. This is actually why it gets the bad rep of it being like nonsense. The reason for it is there's something called neuroplasticity. Your brain gets better at the things it does most often. So the trick is to practice through the viewpoint or the lens of your ideal. Whatever the ideal is. If you want to get better at boxing, practice how you would if you were already better? Like if you were already as best as you can be, how would you move? Like what would you do? How would you think, right? A good way to understand this is through the Mike Tyson example. Mike Tyson's trainer Cus D'Amato wasn't just sitting around imagining winning. They were running through the fights in their heads, the combinations, the footwork, what to do when something goes wrong, how to keep going after taking a hit. They were rehearsing the person, not the prize. The problem I see with mental rehearsal is people always imagine the ending. I'm sure imagining the end result has its time and place. However, what I find is the best way to do it is through leveraging neuroplasticity in your favor and picturing the process, but just through your ideal. So it hits both, it checks off both boxes. That's what we're going for. It's a lot better to go through the process in this way than it is to just imagine, like, for example, winning the belt and that's it. It doesn't really help you. It doesn't even serve as a real experience. This is exactly what I used when I was talking about the social skill example at the beginning of the video. I would run through conversations that I had already had, and then I would correct them in real time, and then I would run through them again. I did this because it was fun. I didn't know what I was actually doing, but the results speak for themselves. So here's how you actually do this. Step 1, relax. So relax your body, breathe deeply, and just let yourself be open to the experience. And this is actually very important. I skipped this when I first started. And then step 2, start with the identity. Instead of imagining the goal or the end results, imagine the identity. How does that person act? How does that person move? How does that person, practice this skill, whatever you're trying to get better at? When you do that, you operate through this ideal and you start gaining experience in that version of yourself. Then 3, make it very specific. Don't just picture yourself being good at something. Picture a real situation, what you see, what you hear, how your body feels. The more specific it is, the more your brain treats it as a real experience. And then 4, when your brain messes up, or rather when you mess up the impersonation, don't panic and don't see it as an attack to your self-image. Just correct it calmly. This is important because when you start to panic and include emotions the other way, so when you start getting emotional that it's not working or that you're not doing it properly, you start to believe that and you kind of create the wrong experience. And then the last step, make sure this is in present tense. Don't imagine your future self doing this. This is you right now. Run through it all in the present tense. Because the moment you start thinking of it as a future thing, it starts becoming a fantasy rather than an experience that you're amassing. Remember, experiences are from the past. For you, you create the experience in the present and then it becomes an experience from the past. There's no future involvement. We're creating a future version of yourself, sure. However, he acts in the present, or she. So the final point here is, so remember, identity is built through experience. However, you can't get the identity, or rather the experience, without the identity. So it's kind of like a feedback loop. So the way you circumvent this is obviously creating fake experiences in that version of whatever the identity you want to be in reality. And then you act as that. And then you wait for your self-image to update. It'll take time. You can't just immediately do it one time and expect it to work. This is something that will help you. However, you have to stick to it. And if it takes, like 5 minutes a day for you to stick to it, that's better than doing it for 30 minutes or an hour a day. Remember this, your self-image isn't just belief, it's the instructions, it's the constraints on your behavior. It's like the upper and lower threshold. When you update your self-image, it's like you expand that threshold or that constraint. This is very good. This is what we're going for. And that's basically it. Change the instruction and the behavior changes with it.